there, Booksy. Welcome back to my channel. A few days ago, I asked you to pick my TBR for this weekend. I had 7 Man Booker prize-winning books on my shelves that I need to read by the end of May for the Man Booker 50 Challenge. And I asked you to help me to narrow it down to 2 books that I would read on Sunday. I made a spreadsheet to record the votes. I told you I was a nerd. You didn't believe me. Now here's the proof. So The God of Small Things is the clear winner. That's the book that most people recommended that I read today. Followed closely by Lincoln and the Bardo, and Midnight's Children and A Brief History of 7 Killings both got 9 votes. So I think I'm going to be reading The God of Small Things and Lincoln and the Bardo today, and I'm going to try to read the other 2 books that got 9 votes as soon as possible to see if I can make this a 4-book readathon instead of a 2-book readathon. Oh man, let's see how that works out. On Sunday, I had a really busy day. I had a busier day than I planned to because a project that I was working on, I got called in to work on Sunday evening. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to read all the books that I planned to. So I had to push my Sunday reading over to Monday, which means that since I didn't read like I promised on Sunday, in order for me to read on Monday and do the 2 books, I feel like I'd owe you something. So I decided that instead of reading 2 books in 24 hours, I'm going to read 4 books in 48 hours. So this is now a 4 books in 48-hour reading challenge for me. You didn't ask me to do this, but I feel like I owe you. Stay tuned for whether it happens and how it goes. The God of Small Things is about a pair of twins, Esther and Rahel, brother and sister, in India. And while they've grown up separated from each other, they have this connection that causes them to feel things that the other person is experiencing physically. And while they don't speak to each other, this novel, I can tell, is going to challenge and explore that bond between siblings, between twins. That is something that I've always been interested in. So I just started. I'm at page 30. I'm already loving this story. I'll tell you more about it later. So I've just finished reading The God of Small Things by Arundhati. Again, it is a novel about a pair of twins, Esther and Rahel. They're 7 or 8 years old when we meet them. Their cousin has just come from England, and so this is the experience of a lifetime. Having this new kid on the block to explore with and to teach things and to learn things from her because she's from a different culture. Unfortunately, there's a tragedy and the cousin ends up drowning, and the 2 children are somehow blamed. They're somehow considered to be responsible for the incident. What happens right before and what happens next is just a series of really unfortunate events, all small things that lead up to be this big thing that changes everybody's life. The novel is set against a changing Indian society, and so it explores and exposes these changing political concepts and compares and contrasts these different extremes to see whether you win or lose when you make changes. So it compares the effects of the traditional caste system with the new religion that the missionaries have brought and whether people are being liberated or being enslaved by these new ways. It compares the traditional idea of arranged marriage with what it's like when people explore the freedom that they have to marry whoever they want, when they leave their tradition and marry someone from a different culture, and whether they get divorced, or what are some of the compromises that they have to make in order to keep those marriages consistent or keep them going. There's a political comparison between colonialism and reverse colonialism or immigration. There are the tales of the English and the Irish coming to India and what effect they had on the society. But then there's also the tale of the Indian scholar going to England, going to Oxford to study, and what it was like when he went there and married someone from that society instead of marrying a traditional girl from his hometown. This novel had a lot. It had a lot of small things like the title promised, but it's all set against this perfect allegory, which is that the family that we're reading about, they run a pickling or preserving factory, which means that they take small things that should last for just a short time and they preserve them forever, which is what this book does. And I thought that the author used that metaphor and used it really well in order to take what should be the little things that make up a life and show how they make the big things in a life. This was a really, really profound read. And I gave it my coveted 5 stars. It started off being a little confusing. I had to reread the beginning a couple of times just to really get into all the character names and all the secret code that the twins used to communicate with each other, which took a little bit of getting used to. But it was well worth the effort. And now we're off to reread Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. I like this quote. He was the sort of child people imagine their children will be before they have children. Lincoln and the Bardo is a fictional take on a presidential biography. It tells the story of President Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, getting sick and dying while Lincoln is hosting a party in the White House. While this country is at civil war, while the abolitionists are pressing for the slaves to be freed, and while said slaves are still in shackles awaiting freedom. As the story unfolds, we get to see President Abraham Lincoln mourning the loss of his favorite son and feeling unable to sever the connection that he had with his child. But we're also introduced to this supernatural, otherworldly element in which Willie Lincoln and other ghosts are unable to move on. They're unable to sever the connection that they had with the world. And they're stuck in this idea of purgatory, what the Buddhists call the Bardo. So Lincoln and the Bardo is part novel, part play script, part newspaper clippings. And it starts off with this conversation between two ghosts who are not related to President Lincoln in any way, other than they are the ghosts who've probably been around the Bardo for the longest, and they're the ones who are there to welcome Willie Lincoln when he dies and he arrives in purgatory. Conversation between these two undead spirits sets the scene for what the Bardo is like and explains why Willie shouldn't be there. In this opening scene, Volman explains about the sick box, which is their euphemism for a coffin, and he explains how he has come to be here, but why he is recovering so he can return to the life that he had. So Volman was a widower and had just recently remarried a young woman who didn't love him but had been pressed into marriage because of her family's financial situation. Over time, as their relationship grew and they became affectionate with each other, his wife revealed that she was ready for them to consummate their marriage. And so on the day when that was supposed to happen, a beam fell on him and Volman died. Volman died without being able to consummate the relationship, and so he's desperate to recover, get out of his sick box and return to his life. So he's stuck in purgatory because he can't move on to rest because he keeps thinking about what he left behind. In a similar way, the other person in the dialogue is Roger Bevins III, who from his name we assume is someone of middle class or high class society. He slit his own wrist in the bathtub, committing suicide. But just at the point where his life was leaving him, he changed his mind, thought about all the good that he could still enjoy in life. And in his desperation, he threw himself down the stairs, hoping for someone to revive him. So Volman and Bevins are just two examples of the people who Willie Lincoln is going to meet in purgatory. So while these ghosts are revisiting their regrets, Willie Lincoln shows up, and because he's a child, they know that he shouldn't have anything that is mooring him back to the life that he's just passed from. And they express concern that he's here, and that the longer he's here is the more of a likelihood that he'll continue to stay there. And so they're trying to usher him forward. Willie cannot accept the loneliness of death, and when his father does come to the crypt to mourn him, their extraordinary connection becomes a bridge of sorts and provides freedom for not just Willie but the other spirits around, unshackling all these people who've been enslaved to their past. So while we're reading this novel and we're thinking about the impending release of the souls from this Bardo, we're also thinking about the release of the African American slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln was also able to achieve during his presidency. One of the spectacular characteristics about this book is how the author curated quotes from various sources that often disagreed on almost everything, to the point where they disagreed on whether there was a moon or it was an overcast sky on the night when the boy died. But the author was able to take all of these different sources, different quotes, different voices, and establish them as kind of like a humdrum in the background of what would be an important oration. I read this story last year and really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good book. And knowing how profound a story it becomes even at the end, this time I was able to see even more literary quality in it while I was reading it, and so this time I'm giving it a 5-star rating. the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, Salim Sinai was born. It is also the moment at which his homeland, India, becomes independent, and so Salim and India are historical twins. They also share their birth hour with 1,000 other children whose mothers were competing to have the first baby in the new country. And because of this group of Midnight's children have a linked destiny, not just with the country, but with each other. Salim is a novelist writing the story of his family, so he goes back through the ages and starts by introducing his maternal grandfather, a German-educated doctor with an incredible nose, incredible in its size and its ability to sniff out the future. When this doctor returns to his village, he's considered a good prospect for marriage. So there's a man in the community who invites him to come and tend to his daughter. But because his daughter is a young virgin, he can't allow the doctor to examine her body, and so there is a hole cut in the middle of a sheet, and young Dr. Aziz has to examine his patient through this circular hole, seeing her only bit by bit. And so every time he goes to visit her, he sees another part of her body, but is always limited by this 7-inch hole. Over the course of numerous maladies, and young Dr. Aziz piecing together some kind of a mental collage of what his young patient looks like on the other side of the sheet, they fall in love and are married. And this perfect white sheet reappears at various points in the story, becoming a metaphor for so many different things. Dr. Aziz and his wife have 3 daughters, the brainy Aliyah, the middle daughter Mumtaz, who is as dark as midnight, and the young Emerald, Green Emerald. All 3 have boyfriends. The intelligent one has a scholar who she's been waiting on forever. The dark-skinned daughter falls for a young poet who's been hiding in the basement, and they eventually get married. And the youngest daughter falls for the man who's been pursuing the young poet, trying to kill him. Eventually, the poet and the middle daughter, who they call Black Mumtaz, get divorced, and the older sister's boyfriend falls for her and marries her instead, renaming her from Black Mumtaz to Amina, and their union produces the narrator. Interspersed between the lives of the family history and the country's history are interruptions from a woman called Padma, which is ironic because the author Salman Rushdie later went on to marry a woman named Padma. But in the novel, Padma is the one who urges the narrator to jump ahead to reveal things, even out of the sequence in which they happened. When her curiosity is appeased, he circles back and goes back to his own timeline, so it becomes a pretty taunting writing style. The narrator's life, of course, is at all points a metaphor for the history of India. His mother and the aunt she stole a husband from, well, that calls to mind the conflict between India and Pakistan and the conflict over the territory called Kashmir. Knowing this, everything in the book takes on a double meaning, but whether from a literal or figurative read, everything in this text is pretty powerful. The sheet through which Ahmed Aziz and his wife met and fell in love, well, that sheet reappears in the next generation when Amina resolves to love her husband bit by bit, separating every quality that he has so that she can love him. But in the end, that separation changed her husband. And we can see that mirrored in the religious conflicts that are described in this book as well. In going through the chronological timeline, when Salim finally gets to the moment of his birth and shares a cruel twist, the other narrator, Padma, is at once infuriated and excited, and we feel that along with her because it's not something that we saw coming. We know that he has historical twins, but when he reveals that he also shares his parents with another person, it's not what you expect. Nothing about this book is what you expect, even if you know the history of India's independence and the backdrop of what was happening in the world at this time. This is still a stunning and infuriating read at all points, at all points. There is so much in here. It's hard to think about everything that I just read. This is a book that once I finished, I immediately wanted to reread. And so I'd like to reread it with you guys. If you want to hear about this book more, if you want to do a discussion, let's talk about putting this on the book club for sometime later this year. I wanted to rush through this one, but Midnight's Children is not a book that you rush through. It is one to luxuriate in and annotate and reread probably more than once. I understand why it is the Booker book. So I'm going to stop here. This was definitely a 5-star read for me, and I think I need to take a little break before I move on to my next reading. So now that I'm done with this one, this is what I'm going to be reading this weekend. I'm not going to ask you guys to vote on my TBR this weekend because I already know you told me last weekend you wanted me to read this. I didn't get to it, so this is what I'm going to be reading going forward. So thanks for watching this video. Leave me a comment down below if you've read any of these books and you want to talk some more about them. So we'll talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading, happy weekend, happy everything. Bye.